All right, well, my stick did not want to give the PowerPoint this morning, so I emailed it to Kevin, and my email didn't want to give to Kevin either. So slow us down a little bit, but hopefully not too much. I ask you to open your Bibles up to 2 Chronicles chapter 28. 2 Chronicles chapter 28, we're going to look at Hezekiah this morning, but first we have a little more to say about King Ahaz. I will say that the picture on the first slide was some cuneiform from Sennacherib's time that showed Hezekiah, showed the tribute that Hezekiah was sending to Sennacherib. Again, just some history that points to what the Bible says there and gives us validation that these are real people, these are real events, and let's not forget those things. What type of king was Ahaz? If you look there in 1 Chronicles chapter 28 and beginning in verse 2, it says, "But he walked in the ways," this is just by way of a quick review, "he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He also made molten images for the Baals." So we have Baal worship in Judah, really for times when it has not been there before. "But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He also made molten images for the Baals. Moreover, he burned incense in the valley of Ben Hinnom and burned his sons in the fire, according to the abomination of the nations from the Lord, whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel. He sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree." So we've taken these good 90 years or so, relatively good 90 years or so of Amaziah, Uzziah, and Jotham, and we've just completely turned them on their heads now. And we have this man here who is wholly devoted to idolatry, the worst kind of idolatry. And in doing so, he's going to bring the whole nation down with him, as we've seen repeatedly, this idea that God is indeed prospering those that will be faithful to him, and those that are wicked or not following him, they will be punished. And then you'll recall we were over in Isaiah chapter 7, and we have that story there. Again, I have the map here that would show you. You can see that finally Syria and Israel have figured out that the real threat is not each other, but is Assyria to the north of them. And so they have combined forces together in an effort to block Assyria and their push down into Palestine. And they would like Judah to join them in that. And so they're putting pressure on, first on Jotham, and now on Ahaz to join that. And if he will not join that alliance willingly, they're going to take Judah by force, put a puppet king there, and make them an ally with the two of them. And Ahaz and the people are worried about that. And Isaiah is sent to him, and he says, "You don't need to worry about this. Be calm, be still. God will take care of this. You just need to trust in God." And Ahaz is not willing to do that. And he says, if you believe, it will go well for you. If you don't believe, it won't go well for you. And in fact, ask God for a sign. It can be from the deepest depths of the earth. It can be from the highest height of heaven. Ask for a sign. And God will show you that he will take care of Damascus and of Samaria. And you won't have to worry about that. And what was Ahaz's response to that? I won't test God, right? I think either he had in his mind already that I'm going to talk to Assyria, or perhaps he was already talking to Assyria and he didn't want God interfering with those plans. So he went through and he said, I won't test God. God sent him a sign anyway, or rather he sent it to the house of David, specifically more than just Ahaz himself, about this virgin birth. And by the time that a baby would have time to be conceived, grow, and know good from evil, Syria and Israel would not be nations that they would have to worry about anymore. God would take care of them. And he said, and then he put another time frame on it, the idea of 65 years. It wouldn't matter. And in much less than 65 years. By the end of 2 Chronicles chapter 28, Syria is a nation no longer. Assyria comes down and wipes them out, kills Rezin, and that's the end of the Syrian nation there. So God does exactly what he says he's going to do. But regardless, now kind of picking up where we left off on Wednesday night, in chapter 28, verse 16, it says, "At that time King Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria for help." So he's going to go and he's going to ask Assyria to apply pressure, and he's going to send money to that. And we get two accounts of that, where it says, in the Chronicles account, it says, but they did not, that alliance did not help him, or the Assyrian king came down and rather afflicted him. But if we go over to 2 Kings, it tells us he listened to him, and he came down and he put pressure on Syria and on Israel. So how do we rectify those? How do we rectify those two accounts there? One says he does help him, and the other one says he was more trouble for him.
I suppose it's possible that we could have two different occasions, though likely pretty close in time.
Yeah.
And I suspect that the resolution is that, yes, he did listen to him, and yes, he did take care of his immediate problems, but Ahaz got more than he bargained for. He traded one master, as it were, for a worse master, or one set of enemies for an even worse enemy.
I really think that's probably what's going on here, is he's looking up at the king of Assyria, and he says, I want you to come down and help me. I'm willing to pay you money to go do that. The king of Assyria is saying, yes, I'm happy to wipe out Israel and Syria. That was my plan anyway. I'll be happy to take your money to do that, and then I'm right next door to you, right? And so it ended up not being a good arrangement for Ahaz. It ended up where he was in just as bad of a situation as he was before. But regardless, the king of Assyria comes, and he took Israel, and he took Syria, or he afflicted Israel. He took Syria. Israel will be gone very shortly. And so the pressure from that regard is off of Ahaz and Judah. But there's still plenty of trouble to come. So Ahaz goes to Samaria in order to meet the king of Assyria for this victory, or for this alliance, this relief of pressure that he has received from him. And he gets up there, and it says, when he sees that, what does he find up there in Damascus that he likes?
An altar.
He finds an altar up there, right? And we see, again, now his rationale is these Syrians were victorious over me, so their gods were powerful enough to defeat Judah. I would like to worship these gods, and that's what the text tell us. I always think back to Amaziah with this victory over Edom that God gives him a few generations back, and how silly it was for Amaziah to worship these gods that he himself, God, had allowed him to defeat. How powerful would these gods be? These gods of Syria, how powerful are these gods of Syria? They've just been wiped out by Assyria. And again, just the foolishness of idolatry, of looking at idols and saying, that's what I want, and that's what I want to serve, even though they have been unable to perform what they've advertised to do. Brad?
I don't know if there's a person who is less deserving of credit than Ahaz, but maybe I'll give him just at least a bit of benefit of the doubt that perhaps this was not a Syrian altar, but an Assyrian altar that brought him. So that would, at least in the idolater's mind, have made the equation work out, if you will.
Perhaps I'm thinking about verse 23 here in 2 Chronicles 28. It says, he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus, which had defeated him. And he says, because the gods of the king of Aram helped him, I will sacrifice to them. So, I mean,
you're right.
I would kind of lean towards those being Syrian gods, but still, just the foolishness of idolatry in general. We've talked about that before. So he likes this altar so much that he sends plans down to Urijah there in Jerusalem, and he says, look at this great altar. I would like this altar. And Urijah is very enthusiastic. And so before Ahaz returns back to Jerusalem, what do we find? We find that Urijah has built a copy of this altar for him. And he's very pleased at this. And so he says, I'm going to worship at this altar, and you can just see, and particularly the contrast here as we move into Hezekiah here in just a few minutes. just a total discarding of a relationship with God, right? I mean, can you picture that in your minds? I like to picture these things as I read through these narratives there of Ahaz coming back to Jerusalem saying, yes, that's exactly the altar that I wanted. What's this other altar that's in front of the temple? This is God's altar here. Hey, can you take that and can you move that around to the north side? And we'll kind of set that off to the side. I want this really great altar right here in front. This is where I want to do the burnt offerings. This is where I want to do all the other types of offerings and worship. And then the irony of it all, he doesn't totally discard the altar of God. He says, just move it around to the north side. Why does he want to keep that? Does anybody remember that from the text? Why would he like to keep this altar of the real God? He says, if I need to talk to God, then I'm going to go around and I'm going to talk to him on the north side. So he totally disregards what God has said. He's willing to disobey God. He's willing to set up this false altar to meet his needs. But I'll keep God's altar just in case. So in verse 24, it says, Ahab gathered together utensils of the house of the Lord, and he cut the utensils of the house of God in pieces, and he closed the doors of the house of the Lord and made altars for himself in every corner of Jerusalem. In every city of Judah he made high places to burn incense to other gods, and he provoked the Lord, the God of his fathers, to anger. So he was wicked to begin with in idolatry, and at the end of all this, after all of this, he just doubles down on it, right? And we have this story of him taking this altar that he finds in Samaria, or in Damascus rather, that he likes, and he makes a replica of it, and he begins worshiping it there, and he actually closes the door to the house of God. So we've seen a steady progression down with a few blips up as we go, right? You know, we've seen men like Asa and Jehoshaphat that are commanding the people to worship God, that are teaching the people to worship God, and then you'll get somebody that's wicked. And then you'll get a good king, and the next time you get those good kings like Joash or Amaziah or Uzziah, they're trying to do what God wants them to do, but then we get that little side note. But the people still worshiped in the high places. The groves were still there. People would worship outside on the fringes of Jerusalem. And so we see this steady downtrend, and now we just have blatant disregard for God, right? We're going to take his temple, we're going to close the doors, and we're going to worship idols instead. And so Ahaz brings that about, and by the time he dies, Judah is very low, and they're steeped in idolatry. And so verse 27 of chapter 28 of 2 Chronicles, so Ahaz slept with his fathers. They buried him in the city of Jerusalem, for they did not bring him into the tombs of the kings of Israel, and Hezekiah his son reigned in his place. So what do we see here again? We see another king of Judah that's not buried with the other kings of Israel. This is our third or fourth one now. I think it's the fourth one. All of them because of their behavior with regard to their worship of God, except for Uzziah, and he was a leper, and that was the reason that he wasn't buried with the king. So Ahaz, a very wicked man, very wicked king, did much harm to Judah, and that's where we leave him. Any comments or questions on Ahaz, his reign, or his influence on the people of Judah? Kevin. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so Ahaz definitely putting his faith in the wrong things and relying on some faulty evidence. Jeff?
Just thinking back, that we saw a trend over and over again where it would say we had a good king, and he did this and he did that, but then it would say, but they did not remove the high places repeatedly.
Yes.
Here we have the high places mentioned where he makes sure there were high places in every city in Judah. Meaning, we've seen kings that have tried to correct the people and tried to do what God wanted. Here we have one that absolutely went the opposite way, even to every city.
He's putting them under
Idolatry everywhere.
under every green tree, right? Everywhere you could put one, he's willing to put one. Trevor?
Sometimes we think that from just a humanistic perspective, that who we worship doesn't matter, but what we worship, who we worship is an embodiment of what is our values, what's most important to us. And the change of these gods from the true God to the idols, you see the impact that it made on their society and their lives, where it talks about him encouraging moral decline. And then we see the summary at the very beginning of the story that this ultimately led to sacrificing their children. These people, the gods that they worshipped and then what they became, these were people that only cared about just fulfilling their own desires and themselves. And it broke down their society, even to the worst points.
Yeah, and at some point it becomes very difficult to recover from that. All right, just a couple of points that I saw from Ahaz, and then we'll move on to Hezekiah here. It's just the idea that each man is responsible for his own faith, right? Ahaz's father was Jotham, one of the better kings, but yet a complete opposite in his behavior. And that's not the first time that we've seen that. Asa's father was Abijah, again a king that wasn't good, and then Asa did so well. Jehoram, a horrible king, even though his father Jehoshaphat had done so well. Joash, after Jehoiada dies, and he gives up his faith there. And it just makes the point that each man has to make his faith each king had to make his faith his own, each man had to make his faith his own, and you saw some that were willing to do that, and some, despite all of the advantages that they were giving, they didn't do that, and the whole nation paid for that. So God always is keeping his promises. Do you remember in verse 4 of Isaiah 7 how God referred to the nations of Syria and Israel? He said these are two pieces of firewood that are just about to go out, right? And within the time that God had specified, just exactly that. He had delivered that to them. Ahaziah was asked to trust in God, and he refused to do so, and so he was reaping the rewards for that. All right, let's take a look here in the time that we have left at Hezekiah. We'll get a couple of lessons of Hezekiah Sunday, today, and then, Lord willing, next Sunday we'll have a couple of prophets in between on Wednesday that we'll talk about. But if you will, if you're not there in 2 Chronicles 29, we'll spend most of our time there. But in truth, I will start in 2 Kings chapter 18. So as we think about who Hezekiah was, 2 Kings chapter 18, beginning of verse 5, we get this statement of him. He says, he trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that after him there was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor among those who were before him. For he clung to the Lord, he did not depart from following him, but he kept the commandments which the Lord had commanded Moses. What a statement there. I mean, in comparison with somebody like Ahab, yeah, that's not a statement there. But we've got some other kings there that are worthy of consideration for these were great men. And the king's account tells us that Hezekiah, there was nobody like him before him. There was nobody like him after him. And he was all about doing what God said. And as we go through the account here of Hezekiah, the point that I would like you to keep in mind as we talk about all of these things is this looking back, right? And we already read it here once in verse 6. It says, he clung to the Lord, he did not depart from following him, but what did he do? He kept his commandments, which what? What's the last part of that verse?
All that commanded Moses.
Yeah, he goes all the way back to Moses, right? He says, Hezekiah is going back to Moses for his authority, for how he wants to behave. And if you look at the first part of back in 2 Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 2, it said he did right in the sight of the Lord according to what? In verse 2. Where does he go back to? All that his father David had done. And as you go through this chapter and you look at what he's going to do in restoring the temple, what he's going to do in observing the Passover, what he's going to do in his religious reforms there in chapter 31, as we go through there, over and over and over again are references either to what David did or what was commanded in the law of Moses. And in truth, as you look back, even on these good kings that we've talked about before, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, we don't get quite that level of detail of that's where these kings are reaching back to. Hezekiah is reaching back to the law of Moses, and he's trying to make things like they were in the days of David, and he's clinging to God with all that he has. So as we go through and we read that, and we'll try to point those out as we go through them. Think about that, how he's truly trying to reach back to what those days where God had given the law to Moses and when David was faithfully bringing that. As far as I could find, Asa was the only other king that was tied back to that behavior like David there in 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 11, which leads me to think maybe a little more of Asa than I have in the past. I've always thought of him as a good king, but he faltered there at the end, and then you have guys like Jehoshaphat and Uzziah and things like that. But what are we told about Asa? Asa, again, was trying to behave like his father David. So another really, really good king there. All right, this is question number 2 in your material for today's lesson. Just a reminder there, what had Ahaz, as we think about Hezekiah and how good he was and how he's going to show that, what had Ahaz done to the temple of God during his reign? And since I'm behind, we just talked about it 5 minutes ago instead of Wednesday. What had Ahaz done?
He had taken the articles and cut them up to make his idols, and then he shut the doors to the temple.
Right. He pulled what he wanted out of the temple. We're going to find out. Apparently, he shoved some stuff into the temple as well, and then he closed the doors up. So, what is Hezekiah going to do in the first year and the first month that he reigns? What's number 1 on his list?
Open the doors of the temple.
I'm going to open the doors of the temple, and I'm going to get things back the way that is prescribed in the law to follow God. So he does that. He says, I'm going to do that first, and he calls the priests and the Levites together, and he talks to them, and he says, this is what I would like to do. I want you to take all of the unclean things that are in the temple. Like I said, apparently things had been brought into the temple, even into the more inner parts of the temple. I want you to get those unclean things out of there in a place that is supposed to be holy. Get rid of those, and let's get this temple the way that God wants it to be. In some ways, it just reminds me of, this is a little bit of a stretch here, but it just seems that he takes a personal affront to the things that have happened to God's things. He's upset that there's uncleanness in a place that should be holy, and he says, I want to take care of that. And I thought of David in the days of Goliath there in 1 Samuel chapter 17, when he walks up and he hears Goliath just cursing and defiling God and defiling God's people, and he says, what's someone going to do about this man that is standing here cursing the armies of the living God? David took it personal. And I really think that Hezekiah has taken it personal on the things that have happened to God and God's temple and what he wants to be done with regard to that. The other interesting thing that he does here, let's look in verse 6 of chapter 29. This is 2 Chronicles chapter 29. The end of verse 5, it says, and carry the uncleanness out of this holy place, the point we were just making Verse 6, for our fathers have been unfaithful and have done evil in the sight of the Lord our God, and have forsaken him, and turned their faces away from the dwelling place of the Lord, and have turned their backs. They have also shut the doors of the porch, and put out the lamps, and have not burned incense or offered burnt offerings in the holy place to the Lord God of Israel. Therefore, the wrath of the Lord was against Judah and Jerusalem. He has made them an object of terror, of horror, and of hissing, as you see with your own eyes. For behold, our fathers have fallen by the sword, and our sons and our daughters and our wives are in captivity for this. So as you look at those verses 6 through 9 there, what is Hezekiah saying?
Came to the right conclusion, to Kevin's point, versus Ahaz. These gods are more powerful than us men. No, you were under judgment. That's the reason. They
Yeah.
defeated you.
Yeah. Jeff?
That's basically what I was going to say. He understood the covenant had been broken, and the consequences were explained by the covenant, and they received the wrath they were due.
Yeah, that's the thing. This is not a new statement. How long, as we've looked at this over the last couple of hundred years of history, have the prophets been making this message clear to the people, right? If you will follow God, God will bless you. If you are unfaithful to God, punishment awaits. And I had a really nifty slide that had all that right on there. All right.
And along with that, he understood God was forgiving and there was repentance. He wanted to make the correction. And he expected that they could correct.
Yeah. I see a couple other hands.
I don't think that the use of the word captivity here, assuming that, and I don't have a reason to believe otherwise, assuming that Ezra, or whoever's written this, is quoting Hezekiah accurately. He's saying, Hezekiah saw what was coming for you people who have been in captivity. He says, captivity is the result from an infidelity. This is why you've been there for 70 years. Don't let it happen again.
Yeah. So Hezekiah is getting the message of the prophets, and he seems to be maybe the first one that's really getting the message and making the application. The things that are happening to us, the things that are going to happen to us, they're happening because of our relationship with God, our failures in our relationship with God. And that's a message that was delivered to Asa, to Joash, to Amaziah, I think. There were several there where the prophet comes and he says, if you do well, God will do well for you. If you forsake God, God will forsake you. Over and over again, that message was delivered. Hezekiah gets that. He understands that they've done evil, they've turned their back on God, and because of that, there's wrath from God that is coming. And so because of that, there in verse 10, he says, now it is in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord God of Israel, that his burning anger may turn away from us. He wants to put things back in place to where they're in a relationship with God that is a positive relationship, and that they're reaping the positive things of a covenant relationship with God instead of the negative things, right? They're in a covenant with God. They just haven't kept their end of it, and God is keeping his end perfectly with the punishments. Kevin.
Jehoiada was the reason that Joash, or Josiah, was a follower of God. We don't find who is directly responsible for Hezekiah being a follower of God. We know it wasn't Ahaz. I don't know whether it's his mother or his grandfather, but we know it wasn't his father. But what does that say about free will? You can decide based on what you think, what you've been heard, or what you've seen, to do right. But credit to whom credit goes, whoever brought up Hezekiah to see, and for this stuff that everybody could see, but for it to actually mean something. Credit to him.
Yeah, that's very good. And speaking of Hezekiah, and I won't spend much long on this because I don't think I can make a direct connection, but you recall that Uzziah was doing really good as long as he was under the influence of the prophet Zechariah. That's just a couple of generations removed now here from where Hezekiah is at. Hezekiah's mother's name was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah. Don't know if that's the same Zechariah and that there's a connection there as to where his influences in early life might have come from, but interesting that both those names are the same. So he wants to make a covenant with God, not the first king to do that. He seems very determined to do so and to do it according to the law of Moses. and to do exactly what God wants him to do. So he commissions the priests to do that. He says, and the Levites, he says, I want you to go in there and I want you to make this temple the dwelling place of God again. And so they get to work on that. And again, as we look at this, as we go throughout this, as we go throughout this observance of the Passover and stuff, what is the first things, this would be in verse 14, verse 15, what is the first thing that these priests and Levites have to do before they can get to work on pulling the uncleanness out of a place that is to be holy?
Had to clean themselves first,
Yeah.
consecrate themselves, then they could go about consecrating the house.
Right, and that's a theme that's going to run through all this whole account of Hezekiah in these 3 chapters here. As they're getting ready to clean the temple, as they're getting ready to observe the Passover, as they're helping the other people observe the Passover, is they've got to make themselves clean. Is there an inference that we can gather from that about the for lack of a better word, the spiritual culture in Judah right now?
The Levites are unclean.
Yeah. And if the people that are responsible for leading the people in their relationship with God are not clean, what does that say about the nation as a whole?
Well, another thing, what we're seeing here, and we see going forward, is that it didn't get in this shape overnight. That is, the people, the priests, the Levites, and the temple did not get into this horrible condition overnight. So it was going to take a little time to clean it all up, starting with the priests and the Levites. Sanctify yourselves, cleanse yourself, and then you will be ready to come in and sanctify the house of God. So, and we see how that does play out. It does take some time to pull all this off.
Yeah. How long does it take them actually to get the temple back in relative working order? Yeah. It takes them. I think it takes them 16 days or so there, so it takes them a little bit. And they had to go in there and they had to find the right utensils. They had to clean these implements. They had to repair them. They may had to remake some of them and get them ready for temple service. Right at the end of that time, they come back and they said, "We've got all of these things. We've made them ready. We've put them back in." And Hezekiah, they are ready to go. A lot of things had been brought in, even into as deep as the inner part of the temple. I don't know if that was like the Holy of Holies there, but deep into the temple, there were things that were unclean, whether through negligence or downright bringing in idolatrous things into the temple. They pulled those out, and you again picture this in your mind's eye there. You see the priests that are bringing these things out of the temple. They bring it into the courtyard. They hand it to the Levites. The Levites pick it up and they take it outside the city and they take it into the valley of Kidron, and they burn it there. And you see that the valley of Kidron, that's not the first time that's used as a garbage dump for getting rid of unclean things. Asa in his day, when he got rid of the idols and the things associated with idolatry, took them to the valley of Kidron and he burned them there. Josiah here in another couple of generations, when he's cleaning out idolatrous things from Jerusalem, he's going to take them to the valley of Kidron and he's going to burn them there. That's what Hezekiah is doing now. So after 16 days, the priests and the Levites, they come to Hezekiah and they say, "We have done what you have asked us to do, and the temple is ready for worship." So what is the first thing that they're going to do? I'll push you down here to verse 24, says it pretty explicitly. The verses in front talk about that a little bit. What's the first thing that they're going to do now that the temple is back in order? And we've had a few comments that have referred to the general principle of what's going on here.
They're going to make a sin offering to account for their sin.
Sin offering for who? For all Israel. They're going to make a sin offering for all Israel first, all right? So the priests have got themselves to the state where they can offer service to God acceptably, and now before they put the regular cycle of worship according to the law of Moses back in, they're going to offer a sin offering for all of the people, for the whole nation. And again, point you to what I mentioned before, to watch for this callback to the law of Moses, callback to earlier times. Look at the language that is there as these priests are doing that. The priests is sure that they're the son of Aaron. They're sprinkling the blood on the altar, just like was specified. The people are laying their hands on the male goat of the sin offering as they kill it. All of these things are being done just as you would read about in the law of Moses. And then they go about and they begin the worship, and they have all of the musical instruments that are associated in playing with these burnt offerings. And again, look at that past authority and precedent that you see there for what they're doing. This music and these instruments are assembled according to the command of David and Gad, of Nathan the prophet, right? These instruments are called the instruments of David. Hezekiah is making sure that the people are going back to the law of Moses and doing what God has asked them to do. And so as they put this worship back into place, this regular temple worship back into place, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of singing, they're bowing down and they're worshiping. And verse 36 sums that up, saying, "Then Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced over what God had prepared for the people, because the thing came about suddenly." Who had done all the work? Was this some sort of miraculous event that this happened? It wasn't. Hezekiah had made the decision that this is what we're going to do. He called the priests together. The priests had sanctified themselves. They had called the people together. They had done things according to the law of Moses, and temple worship is back like it's supposed to be, and it's working great. Who do they give the credit to? They give the credit to God. They said, because of God's blessing on us, we've been able to do these things quickly that we were trying to do. Kevin.
Interesting that though the priests weren't clean, they all knew what they should have done. When Hezekiah came to them and said, "What do we need to do?" they knew what to do.
Yeah. And you see there, that's one point that we didn't make there is the priests were not as diligent as what the rest of the Levites were at making themselves clean. So at some point, the Levites had to jump in and they had to help out as well. So you see efforts being made to do things just exactly as God wanted them to do. So I think we're just a minute from being done before we really jump into the section on the Passover. Is there anything to be said about Hezekiah restoring this worship and how he's doing that? Stephen?
Chronicles obviously gives us a great deal more
Yes.
about that.
Yes.
And I think that goes to the distinction between Chronicles and Kings, that the pattern for restoration is what the people receiving the book of Chronicles needed to see. How do we do this again? Because they needed to go see that and see the restoration, and they were going to go through the same process. Versus King's account, which is telling good things about Hezekiah, but gives us a lot more of his failures.
Yeah.
And it's that point to the failure of Judah, which is what the people need to hear to receive that message. We're in captivity and we deserve it.
Yeah. So and really, particularly in the accounts that we're talking about now, is King saying, yeah, Hezekiah was great. Chronicles saying he's going back to the law, and that's what's making him great. So, all right, well, we'll pick up hopefully with PowerPoint on Wednesday and finish Hezekiah, and then we'll look at, I believe it's Micah and Nahum as well.